In biomechanical actions, what we're going to do now is to start from the hand, the fingers, the phalanges. So Amanda's just going to curl the fingers, not moving the wrist, but just curl the fingers. That's flexion. And then to straighten them out again is extension. Flexion and extension. And again, flexion and extension. From a lateral position, flexion of the fingers, just the fingers curling, that's flexion. And then extension is to straighten them out again. Flexion and extension. Flexion. Biomechanical actions, so biomechanical action at the wrist, lifting the palm of the hand towards the front of the forearm is flexion. Flexion, flexion, and then moving the back of the hand towards the back of the forearm, extension. Flexion, extension. So now that the person's on the table, we go through the same process again. Flexion at the wrist, extension at the wrist. Flexion and extension. A deduction, movement towards the midline, and the only thing that moves is the hand, and then a abduction. A deduction, a abduction. If you have a complete view of this one, a deduction, a abduction. Moving on to the elbow, flexion at the elbow is where the forearm, the front of the forearm comes towards the front of the upper arm, flexion. Extension is to move the forearm away from the upper arm, to straighten the arm out. Flexion, to bend at the elbow. Extension is to straighten it out. And one more time, flexion and extension. Flexion at the elbow and then extension at the elbow. Flexion and extension. Flexion at the elbow, forearm moves towards the upper arm, flexion. The forearm moves away from the upper arm, extension. Flexion at the elbow, extension at the elbow. Flexion, extension, flexion and extension. And in this case it's just the forearm that moves, but the upper arm stays still. And supination, turning it back up again. Pronation, the palm of the hand moves backwards. Supination, the palm of the hand is upwards. We can just bend at the elbow and then turn the palm down, that's pronation. Turn the palm up is supination. Pronation and supination. With the arm straight, elbow is extended, the palm turns backwards, pronation, the palm turns forward, supination. Pronation, supination. And bending at the elbow, the palm turns down, pronation, and the palm turns up, supination. Pronation and supination. Pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. And bringing it backwards is extension. Forwards, flexion. Backwards is extension. One more time, flexion and extension. The arm coming forward is flexion. Going back to the start position is extension. Forward, flexion. Back to the start position is extension. Now if we stayed there and take the arm backwards, that's extension, and coming forward again is flexion. Going back, extension, coming forward, and it can go all the way, right up, all the way. Keep going, that's it. So that is all flexion, and coming back is extension, abduction, and then coming back is a deduction. Abduction, abduction, a deduction, adduction. And then moving out to the side is a abduction, and either with the elbow in extension or in flexion, abduction abduction, abduction, adduction, 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 and adduction. And the forearm comes across towards the middle of the torso, medial rotation at the glenohumeral joint, and the forearm moves away. That's lateral rotation. Medial rotation, lateral rotation. One more time, medial rotation and lateral rotation. Bend, and the forearm moves across the torso. Medial rotation, away from the torso is lateral rotation. Medial rotation and lateral rotation. All of that is happening in the ball and socket, the glenohumeral joint. Bending, still focusing on this joint here, that would be medial rotation. With the elbow in that same position from there, focus onto the upper arm, and if that twists towards the midline, medial rotation, medial rotation. Keeping the upper arm stable, medial rotation, it's not going to go too far because it's banging into the abdominal area. Lateral rotation, and that can be done in different positions. This is in an abducted position. Medial rotation, so the action is still occurring at this joint. Lateral rotation, medial rotation, lateral rotation. And if we have the elbow pointing forward, that's in a flex position. And if Cora can just move her forearm in, medial rotation, the forearm comes out, lateral rotation, medial rotation, and then comes out. It can come out as far as you like, lateral rotation, and that's in the three different. Still focusing onto the glenohumeral joint from here, and then from there, if we go forward, flexion, coming back, extension. Focus onto this joint here, forward, flexion, backwards, extension. And then if we lift the arm out to the side, abduction, abduction, adduction, adduction. AB, movement away from the midline, AD, movement towards the midline. And then if we just bend at the elbow, forearm goes in, medial rotation, lateral rotation, medial rotation, lateral rotation. And then if we lift the arm out to a right angle position, do the same thing again, medial rotation, lateral rotation, medial rotation, lateral rotation, have the elbow pointing forward, same thing again, medial rotation, lateral rotation, one more time, medial and lateral. This time moving on to scapular movement. It's still shoulder movement, but we're going to separate the movements of the arm and of the scapula. So the shoulder is lifted up towards the ear, that's elevation, and then it moves further away from the ear, that's depression. Elevation and depression. Elevation and drop it down is depression. Elevation is to lift the shoulder up, depression is to drop it down. Elevation and depression. Elevation and depression. Elevation and depression. Elevation and depression. One more time. Elevation and abduction is to move forward, and adduction is to move backwards. To move the shoulders forward, so moving the scapula further away from the midline, is abduction of the scapula, and moving the shoulder blades back to make them touch behind is adduction. Abduction and adduction of the scapula. The scapula moves away from the vertebral column, so making the shoulders touch at the front is abduction of the scapula, and making them touch at the back is adduction. Abduction and adduction of the scapula, the scapulothoracic articulation. One more time, AB and adduction of the scapula. Very slight movement to roll the scapula forward is protraction, and then to roll it backwards is retraction. Protraction and retraction of the scapula. So People can do this if they don't have an arm. Subtle rolling forward is protraction, rolling back is retraction. Protraction and retraction. Protraction and retraction. There is something called the shoulder rhythm, and in this particular case, the arm, the glenohumeral joint, moves out to 90 degrees. And that is just the ball and socket joint that moves from there. From then on, the inferior angle of the scapula will then swing out as we move up another 60 degrees, so the inferior angle will swing out. So that becomes a scapular movement. And then the last 30 degrees goes back to being a ball and socket movement. So if we can just do that one again, thank you. Up to 90 degrees is ball and socket. Next 60 degrees is scapular movement. And the last 30 degrees then becomes ball and socket movement again. The shoulder rhythm.